All right. Also, to give you a little kind of heads up on where we're at in the class, let me get some chalk out of my. We've only got a couple of weeks. That's okay. All right, so today is Friday. Oh, what's the date? Was today the 9th? Yes, 4/9. Okay, today we're doing chapters 12 and 13 and the bones and muscles lab activity, which is the bingo, which will be fun. Okay, on Monday, we are going over chapter 14. Wednesday of next week, which I believe this is the 14th, right? 4/14, this is 4/12. We'll be doing, this is your brain on drugs lab, and this is a fun one as well. We play games with drug goggles on, so that's kind of fun. Okay, and then on Friday, okay. Friday, we're going over chapter 16. Okay, and then that would be what, 4 of 16. And then the Monday after that, we are going over the psychiatric drugs. So those are our 2 main drug chapters. There's 2 parts to it, which in the past I've done as 2 different lectures, but they ended up being really short, so I just put them as one big day. The Wednesday after that, you don't have lab because we are pretty much cruising. Done after that, and then I believe your exam, let me make sure I get the date right, is the 23rd. I'll make sure I write the correct date. Yep, the 23rd. Okay. It'll be open as normal from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. or 11:55, I guess technically. It'll have a 2-hour time cap unless you have accommodations, and it will be cumulative, which means all topics throughout the whole class are fair, okay? I pretty much like to take exam questions that were maybe the ones that people struggled on a little bit more. So maybe if you think back to those topics like, oh, the colorblind recessive trait one, where it was X-linked recessive trait, that one's usually on there because people like to kind of forget about those. But like I said, you do have like your notes in front of you and things like that. We will, if you wanted, because this is a no lab day, we can discuss if you want to make it a review day. I'd be happy to come in and do that. But we can talk about that as it gets closer. Yes. Yep. Yes. Yes.
So we won't have an exam for it?
No, it's a final exam. Yep, that is the 4th exam. So if you look at your syllabus, each exam, the 3 that we've had so far, they're each worth 15%, but that group is 45%. And then your final exam is 15% of your grade, which is a different group. And it's just, it can help you by doing that if you do really well on your final exam because it's a separate group. Yeah, I guess we can talk about that too as well. So just a reminder that we had those lab quizzes. And you will have one today. I saw a couple people turn it in already. That's totally fine. The lab quiz from today will be due at 11:59 p.m. All the lab quizzes for the class, they were 25% of your grade. okay? And then lab attendance, so if you showed up to lab, you got 3 points each time. And I use that as a total score. And then that ends up being about 5%. So even if you showed up and didn't listen to me, there's 5% of your grade. Class assignments, so those chapter assignments that are on my Wartburg, those are 10% of your grade. And then the 3 exams that we already had, those are 45% of your grade. You could also think of them as each is 15, but they're in this group, okay? And then your final exam is worth 15%. Okay? And just to let you know, so if you're ever curious as to how those percentages come out, so let's say, for example, like your assignments, let's say there was like 300 possible points and you got 280 or something like that. I take 280 divided by 300, which I can't do that math, and then I multiply that by 0.01, and then whatever that number is ends up being like a number over here, and then I add up each of those the same way, and that this total number right here ends up being your grade, your percentage. That's how that works. Any questions about the setup of the rest of the class? All right, you will have a quiz here. It's due tonight at 11:55 p.m. over what we're talking about. Okay, you'll have an assignment here and an assignment here. And those will be due the respective lecture day after. So this one will be due the Friday, and this one will be due Monday. And I believe your drugs are due on 3/21, which I believe is that Saturday, or 4/21, excuse me. That's a typo. Good, and then there will be a quiz here as well. So if you're somebody who's like, oh, I'm so worried about my grade right now, there's a good chunk of stuff that we still have left that if you do well on can really help you. For example, your final exam, 2 quizzes, 3 assignments. All right, any questions about this? All right, let's get to moving. And if you have questions and you wanted to email me, that is cool too. All right, so we are talking about the skeletal system today. We're going to learn about essentially it says 5 functions of the skeletal system. That's a way for us to be able to kind of figure out a way to understand all the things that our skeletal system does for us, which you probably don't think about a lot. Most people think that the muscles do most of the work, but we're going to talk a lot about how muscles are related to bones as well. I'm just setting it up here on Zoom. There we go. All right, the next thing is we're going to know about the components or what makes up the skeletal system. We're going to talk about what are the parts of the long bone, what is osteoporosis, you've maybe heard about that or maybe seen a commercial on TV. How do bones grow and remodel and repair? Because luckily for us, if we fracture a bone or break a bone, it's not an end-all be-all, right? Most normal, healthy individuals have the ability to kind of reassemble, remodel, and repair those bones. We're going to talk about synovial joints and what type of angular movements do they allow. Okay, so those 5 functions of that skeletal system. This would be a great assignment question, exam question, because we want to know why is the skeletal system important? Why are we learning about it? So movement, support, protection, mineral storage, and blood cell formation. Movement's probably the one that's maybe the thing that came to your mind. So as I'm moving my arms up here and I'm trying to explain things, my muscles are contracting and relaxing in different aspects to move my skeletal system, my bones. Okay, your bones don't move. It's the muscles around them that kind of contract and relax in certain patterns that allow for the movement. It also allows for support. That's another common one that people think of because, you know, the way that we are built as humans, we have an upright stance. Okay, the way that my body can stand up against this thing called gravity is because of the support of my skeletal system in combination with my muscle and my muscular system. It also helps with protection. Think about your rib cage. Your rib cage is kind of protecting a lot of really important things like your heart and your lungs that are needed for everyday activity and that are working right now. So it can also protect things like your pelvis is protecting your internal and organs and reproductive system, your rib cage protecting lungs and your heart, your skull protecting that thing between your ears that we tend to forget to use sometimes, right? And then mineral storage, this is one where we start to get a little bit, oh, I didn't really think of that. Well, maybe you've heard of, oh, I need to eat my vitamins and minerals. But what are minerals? Well, bones kind of are this like hub or reservoir or like a headquarters, I guess you could say, for calcium and phosphorus ions. These deposits and withdrawals of these ions help maintain the concentration in bodily fluids. If we think a couple of exams back, we were talking about the blood system, the cardiovascular system, and remember that red blood cells were created in the red bone marrow, and we'll show that here in a couple of slides. So these mineral deposits that have calcium, phosphorus, things like that are produced in these bones help with the bodily functions and fluids, such as your blood, to help transport oxygen, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said in that last one, it's also for blood cell formation. Certain bones contain the tissue where blood cells are formed. All right, so in a couple of minutes, more like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, we're gonna be playing bingo, okay? And the way the bingo card is going to work is I'm gonna have a PowerPoint up here with some pictures that kind of look like this one, but it's not gonna be this one. And then it'll have like a blank over it. Like I would maybe put a blank over this one and I'd be like, what's that? And if you have it on your card and you remember what that is, you get to put a little chip on it and we're gonna see who could, you know, win a bingo. There's two things, right? You're gonna have to pick the ones that I picked. We don't know which ones I'm picking. And also you gotta kind of remember a little bit. And don't worry, I told you didn't have to memorize them. So some slides have clues on them that could help you in the next slides, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit of educated guessing and following clues and a fun way to kind of learn some bones and muscles, okay? So as we're going along, you can either A, fill out that yellow piece of paper with some of the bones on it. That would help you. You could also reference back to that when we are, you know, in the middle of bingo and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't remember if that's the ulna or the radius. Well, you've got that little piece of paper right there that you can fill out that could help you. And then as you're going along, maybe you have oh, sorry, yes, please grab each pile. Maybe you have an emotional connection to some certain body part. You're like, man, my little brother pushed me down the stairs and I broke my ulna. So that's one of my favorite bones. That's an example. I don't have a brother and I've never broken a bone. But maybe you have an emotional connection to some sort of bone or muscle. Put it on that bingo sheet, okay? And if you need to, you can also fill in some muscles. I know I don't have a handout for muscles, but muscles tend to be the ones that people somewhat know, or at least they think they know because they like go to the gym or something like that and they try to like use those muscles. Anyways, so a couple of the ones that I want us to pay attention to here. The skull. The skull is broken into different parts, okay? The frontal bone, well, that makes sense. That's essentially your forehead. It's right here in the middle of your forehead. Your zygomatic bone is also known as the cheekbones, which, you know, some people like to accentuate when they're, you know, contouring their face and things like that. You could say, oh, look at your zygomatic bones. Try it on someone. Maxilla bone is right kind of below your nose, kind of right at the beginning of your jaw and your teeth, and your mandible bone, which is your jaw. Or I guess mandible, excuse me, mandible. And I think of that one as if something is malleable, like a metal is bendable, that's kind of what's going on right here. When I'm talking, that bone is moving up and down. You can't really see because I'm wearing a mask, but you can imagine. We also have the parietal bone, the temporal bone, and the occipital bone on the back of your skull. You guys can kind of see that on the top right picture. In your pectoral girdle, so you've probably heard of somebody going to the gym saying, I'm going to work on my pecs. Okay, well, that's true, kind of, right? You're working on your pecs. But the pectoral girdle is kind of up here in the shoulder and neck region. You have your clavicle. I had a family friend who broke their clavicle bike riding once. Your scapula, which is also, you can see it a little bit better on the right-hand side of that picture. You've got your rib cage, which contains your sternum, your ribs, and your costal cartilage. So that costal cartilage, so if you think of your rib cage, the costal cartilage is like this part right here between the sternum and the rib cage. That actually is a mixture of costal cartilage and intercostal muscles. And so when you take a deep breath, remember we've talked about this in class, you take a deep breath, your rib cage expands, but to inform you, the bones do not expand. It's those muscles that are contracting and that cartilage that has some flexibility that allows your rib cage to fill up with some air and, you know, help with some deep breathing. You have your pelvic girdle here. A couple of things you can kind of note about is with this vertebral column. So your vertebrae, you've probably heard of your vertebrae before. Those are those little bumpy things on the back of your back. At the bottom, we have your sacrum and your coccyx. And some people call that your tailbone. Okay. You also have your coxal bones, which are essentially those bigger kind of parts of that pelvic girdle right here, which I know that picture isn't, it's kind of bleached out a little bit here. Your patella, if you've ever heard of like the patella tendon, it's right below this patella bone. This is an interesting bone because it's one of the only floating bones that we have in our body. And what that floating bone means is most of the bones are all connected to each other in some way or some form. But that patella bone is floating with some tendons and some cartilage, and it's not really attached to anything. That's that weird kind of bone in the front of your knee where if you get it to relax enough, you can kind of move it around. Have you ever tried to do that before? It's kind of interesting. You have your metatarsals and your phalanges down by your feet, okay? So it goes tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges down here at the bottom. So that tarsals are the bigger part, metatarsals, and then phalanges. You've probably heard of your tibia or your fibula here. Those are the bones in your bottom half of your leg below the patella. Your femur is a big long bone kind of in your upper thigh here. You have carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. And what's cool about our hands and our feet is the tarsals are on your feet. And I kind of remember that because tarsals and toes both start with the letter T. And then carpals, well, in order to drive my car, I need my hands on the steering wheel. Carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So they kind of go tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. The phalanges are both kind of the points or like the ends of the fingers and toes. You have your ulna and your radius. So there's a couple of ways to remember your ulna and your radius. So anatomical view in science is the way that I'm standing right now. And the reason I'm standing in this particular way is because if I was standing like this, that wouldn't be correct. So I have to have my arms out like this. This is anatomical view. With your pinky and your thumb, that's how you can kind of tell where your ulna and your radius is. Your radius is the bone that's attached to your thumb, and your ulna is the one attached to your pinky in anatomical view. So that's kind of a way to remember that. The word ulna is a smaller word, U-L-N-A. And then I remember that my pinky is the smallest finger, so that's why my ulna and my pinky are kind of lined up there together. And then you can see another view of the clavicle, scapula, and the humerus. The humerus is up here, kind of in your bicep tricep region of your arm, connected to your shoulder. So let's talk a little bit more about the types of vertebrae. You've maybe heard of this before. We have 33 vertebrae in our vertebral column. So our vertebrae are made up of these bones, and in real life, the biggest one is probably about this big, okay? And from the top to the bottom of your vertebral spine, they have different regions that are kind of zoned off by the number of vertebrae that are in them. So the first 7, which you can kind of see on the right picture, but it's a little kind of bright, are the cervical. These are the ones that are kind of attached to the skull and the brain up top. Not necessarily the brain, the skull, excuse me. And they allow us to do all the movements that our head does. You can shake no, yes, side to side, maybe crack your neck a little bit if you've been stiff. Those are your cervical vertebrae. The next 12 are called your thoracic vertebrae, which kind of makes sense because this is our thoracic cavity, right? This is where my lungs are, my rib cage, my heart. That's your thoracic cavity. Thank you very much, whoever named them. Those are your thoracic vertebrae. Okay, then we go to our lumbar, which I think of it like lumber, like wood, like trunk. I don't know if that's far-fetched for you guys, but like when you cut down a tree, you use it for lumber. Well, that tree trunk is kind of where we're starting here with that lumbar vertebrae. The next 5 are indicated right here as the lumbar vertebrae. Then you have your sacrum and your coccyx, which I showed you on the last slide. And some people call that your tailbone, that area. So your coccyx is actually 4 bones fused into your tailbone. So the coccyx is technically a region, but if you ever heard someone refer to the coccyx, like if you go to the chiropractor and they're like, oh, your coccyx is out of place or something, that's actually technically 4 bones, but some people refer to it as 1 because they are fused together. Your sacrum are also 5 fused bones as well. Between your vertebrae are these intervertebral discs, and this is the cartilage between your vertebrae. This is really helpful. It allows, like I said, for our neck to move, but also think about all the things our back has to do. If you bend down and touch your toes, my vertebrae can go in the other direction. If you ever were a gymnastics person or did tumbling and you bent your back in the other direction, if you want to twist and play some softball, or if you want to go bowling, think about all that stuff that our back has to have enough movement to do. And if we were rubbing bone on bone for that, that would not be a very pleasant feeling. So luckily for us, we have these intervertebral discs that are made up of cartilage between our vertebrae that allow for movement and support, also so that it allows, well, so that's not bone on bone rubbing either. So our upper extremities. So an extremity, we refer to it as like your limbs. So your lower extremities are going to be your legs. Your upper extremities are going to be your arms. Some of the bones in your upper extremity skeleton are considered in your pectoral girdle. The first one is your scapula, which I don't know if when you were a little kid, if you ever tried to like go like this with your arms and make yourself look like you have wings. Did anybody try that when you were a kid? It's this bone back here that kind of looks like a little wing, or I think it looks kind of like a little pork chop or a steak. I don't know. Maybe I'm hungry. But this is the scapula. You have your clavicle, which you could feel your clavicle on yourself right now. It's this bone that's right kind of below your neck. Your humerus is the bone in the upper part of your arm. Remember, your radius and ulna are the 2 bones that come down here. You have your carpals, your metacarpals, and your phalanges. Those are all upper extremity skeleton. All of these you could put on your bingo card if you wanted. You then have your lower extremities. So remember, upper extremities is arm, lower extremities is leg. You have your ilium, your pubis, and your ischium. Those are all a part of your pelvic girdle. So if you've ever heard anybody refer to the pelvic girdle, it's essentially around the low back and the hips. Your pelvic girdle is made up of the ilium, which is kind of that main part. Remember, here's that coxal bone. You have your pubis bone, which is kind of right in front. And then you have your ischium, or also people call it like your sit bones, that you kind of feel when you're sitting down. Another part of your lower extremity skeleton is your femur, which is the main part of your upper leg. You have your tibia and your fibula, and those I kind of remind myself of are like the ulna and radius, but in our legs, okay? So your tibia is the bigger bone. Fibula is a little bit smaller. The way I remember the difference between those two is if you've ever told like a fib or a lie or something was fake. I know this one may be a little far-fetched as well, but the tibia is really big. The fibula is kind of fake. It's silly. It's on the side. You have your tarsals, your metatarsals, and phalanges. Tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges. Bang, bang, bang. Right down there at the bottom. Okay. So you've maybe heard about me talking a little bit about cartilage. And we're going to show how it's related to bone tissue. So cartilage and bone are both connective tissue. If you guys remember way back when we talked about the different types of epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue. Cartilage and bone are a type of connective tissue. And the cartilage, it can be in your ear, it can be in your nose, but it's also found in joints. And joints are essentially where bones are joined together, but also where we find movement. And different joints have different types of movement for us. Like your shoulder, for example, unless you've had a shoulder injury, can move a lot of different cool ways, right? Because of the ball and socket joint, which we can kind of, well, that's your hip, this is your femur. But also think about that ball and socket joint of your hip. I can kick my leg up and back and side. I play soccer, so I kick my leg like that, okay? That is because of the joint, but the bone right here is connected to the pelvic girdle here, but what's in between there is some cartilage. And it's also the same, not the exact same, but similar cartilage that we find in our vertebrae. It's the cartilage that we find in our shoulders, in our nose, in our ears. This is cartilage. It's structural, but flexible and supportive, okay? Our ears, if you feel, are a little flexible, but if you don't touch them, they stay in their same shape and they're supportive still. They're still in that same shape. Here we can talk a little bit about spongy versus compact bone. At the ends or the knobs of the bone, right down here, it's considered spongy bone. And it kind of looks like a little, well, like a dish sponge. You guys do dishes, right? Everybody does dishes in here. Well, you're at least shaking your head, right? So the sponge that you use to wash your dishes, that's kind of what this looks like down here. I mean, think of a sponge. It's kind of squishy, but still a little supportive. It's in the same shape. That's what the ends of bones look like. And that web-like structure, or the kind of, I guess it's web-like, sponge-like structure, allows for cushion of impact on bones. It's also true that when you are walking, if you have, y'all good? Great, congratulations on your vaccine. Okay, while you're walking, let's say you twisted your ankle 2 weeks ago and you kind of have a limp, all right? The spongy bone in your legs and in your ankle will actually kind of situate to whatever gait in which you're walking. So you guys know what I mean by the gait in which you're walking. So people have different gaits. So if you've ever been a runner, they maybe talk about your gait. It's kind of like the style in which you walk. So whether that be like how long your strides are, or whether you compensate your legs either way, or maybe if you've ever looked at like running shoes and they see if your ankles kind of turn in when you're running or walking, those all kind of correlate into your gait. So if I twisted my ankle and I'm kind of limping around for the next 2 weeks, my spongy bone will kind of recalculate itself to help with the impact that it's receiving in that kind of situation. In your compact bone, this is kind of a little bit more hollow, a little bit more structural. If somebody breaks a bone or fractures a bone, it's usually in the compact area just because this is spongy. So if you've ever heard of like a compound fracture that goes all the way through, it's in the compact bone. Okay, and in that compact bone, you see blood vessels and blood veins and arteries that help transport the red bone marrow, the blood, to the rest of the body. There are 3 types of cartilage, and we've talked about this in a previous chapter, which would probably, if we're involving 2 different chapters, that'd be a pretty good final exam question if you ask me. There's hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. So while they are all cartilage, they could be used for different things because of the way that they're structurally used and their function. So for like example, hyaline cartilage, this is at the ends of long bones. Like the last slide that I just showed you, a long bone like your humerus, at the end of it, in that ball and socket joint, you're gonna see some hyaline cartilage. This is also in your nose, in the ends of your ribs down here, and also your larynx and your trachea. Remember we talked about those in the respiratory system? Fibrocartilage is the type of cartilage that we find in the vertebral discs and in the knee. This is stronger than hyaline cartilage, so I sure hope that my cartilage in my vertebrae and in my knee are a little bit more structural than in my nose, which is good. And then you have elastic cartilage, which is like our ear flaps. Our epiglottis, remember, is that gatekeeper when we are talking about swallowing food and breathing. If you're going to swallow food, that epiglottis kind of goes like this, and it blocks off that trachea so that the food goes down the esophagus and not down the trachea. It is more flexible than hyaline cartilage. So those are the 3 different types of cartilage. You can think of them kind of like a matrix or a web-like structure, and they help for support and impact. So the actual structure of bone, we have some bone cells, and then you have compact and spongy bone, which I talked about in a couple slides ago, and then you also have the bone matrix. So the bone matrix is made up of collagen fibers. Fibers are string-like things. If you think of like a fiber in your shirt, or I think of it as like an individual piece of string or an individual piece of hair, that is a fiber. And these collagen fibers, collagen is a protein. You've maybe heard of people mixing collagen in their coffee these days. Collagen is a good thing. It helps for structural support and things like that. And then calcium and minerals. You probably grew up and your parents were like, drink your milk, it's good for strong bones and teeth. Well, sort of. Calcium's good for strong bones and teeth, and you can get that in other places besides just milk. Also, some non-dairy products have calcium and minerals in them. Some vitamins you can have calcium and minerals in. Bone cells are pretty cool. They're very distinguishable. And what I mean by that is if I were to look at a microscope and somebody were to show me a picture of a bone cell, it looks like nothing else. The bone cells are very unique. And actually, we have a cool picture right here on the slides. That is what a bone cell looks like. It kind of looks like, I think anyways, you can think whatever you think it looks like, but I think it looks like a tree trunk, right? So in the middle here, we have the blood vessels where the arteries and veins are, and then it kind of has this like circle ring-like structure. And then here's another one, and here's another one, and they kind of make these spirals. So here's where the bones have their blood vessels, and then it kind of goes like this. And then maybe there's another one over here, and they start to kind of wrap up on themselves. They look like nothing else. They're also kind of fun to draw. So if you ever need something to doodle in your notebook while you're listening, doodle a bone cell. All right, there's different types of bone cells: osteocytes, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, osteo. That's kind of an interesting word. If you've ever heard of like And osteo, like, I guess anything with the word osteo in it, it just relates to bone, and things like that. You've got the compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone is where we find the blood vessels. The spongy bone is where the red bone marrow is produced. And I was talking about how that spongy bone kind of absorbs some of that impact of your bone, which is good. So at one point we had to grow, oh, did I go two? There we go. Okay, I got ahead of myself. So these are the 3 different types of bone cells. These cells are important for bone growth, remodeling, and repair. Thank goodness, right? If we ever have a cracked bone or we broke our arm or things like that, we are thankful that our bone cells can repair themselves. So osteocytes are the mature bone cells that maintain bone structure, and they are derived from osteoblasts. So osteoblasts are the bones that are forming bone cells, and osteoclasts are the bone absorbing cells. So they all each have their own job, and they are working to grow, remodel, and repair our bones. Now, we are not starfish, so if you cut your arm off, your whole arm will not grow back. I'm sorry to tell you that. Starfish are like that. Can anybody think of another organism that has a similar, yeah?
Like a big spider can do it, like a tarantula can do it.
Yeah, regrow an arm or a limb back. I'm also thinking of, yeah.
Axolotl.
Say that again?
Axolotl.
Absolotl.
Axolotl has this little.
Cool. Okay.
And certain reptiles do it?
Certain reptiles, yep. I'm also, if you're a Friends fan, you're my lobster. Lobsters can also regrow a limb back. So sometimes they'll cut a limb off of a lobster and throw it back in the ocean. In a couple of weeks, months go by, that lobster's tail or whatever, it comes right back. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, we're not like that, so don't do that. That's not a good idea. But if you do crack a bone, break a bone, your bones will repair itself. Usually it takes a little bit of time, right? If you go get a cast on your ankle because you broke an ankle bone, it's like it could be a 2 to 6 month process depending on how, deep or how harsh the fracture is. And that's why they kind of like to stabilize it with a cast to make sure that our body is resting in that area. I'm sorry that the picture is a little bleached out here, but you guys do have this picture. This is figure 1211 in your book, and this is talking about bone growth. So the first one is cartilage. So this is kind of like thinking back to like a growing fetus in a body and how they would grow a bone and how bone is grown through that. So it starts out as a cartilaginous model and develops and becomes calcified during fetal development. That's that first picture there, which you guys don't have a great picture. It looks like just a blank thing. The exposure is off. But there is on your slides, if you're looking at your own or on your book, a little cartilage kind of calcified, small looking bone. If you've ever heard of anything calcifying, that kind of means hardening. It's also like if you have a pretty big bruise, like on your leg, like you ran into your bed frame and like you got this big bruise on your leg, it's important to sometimes rub those bruises out a little bit after it starts to heal so that your bruise doesn't calcify. Has anybody ever had that kind of sensation of a calcified bruise before? Yeah, it gets a little hard in that area is because the broken blood vessels or the blood in that area calcifies. It makes like a hard kind of feeling wherever that bruise is. So if you ever get a bruise, like you ran into the door too hard or something like that, I'm sorry that all my examples are really kind of harming you in some way. I don't mean this to happen to you. So next, after we have this cartilaginous, calcified kind of thing of cartilage, we go into the newly derived osteoblast, which is a type of cell we just talked about that cover the diaphysis with a compact bone collar. Okay, well, when I think of the word collar, I think of my dog, right, who wears a collar, but that's kind of what's going on here. We start to have a little bit more of compact bone in the middle, kind of like what you would think of like with a dog collar. Then we start to add some blood vessels, which with the blood vessels bring the osteoblasts into the cartilage, and a primary ossification center, osteoblasts, form the spongy bone. So we started to form the compact bone in the last step. Now we're forming the spongy bone. We're getting a little bit closer to a specific type of bone. The medullary cavity forms the compact bone collar, thickens, and the secondary ossification centers appear in the epiphysis. So now we're on the second to the right step here. We can see that in the epiphysis of the bone, the spongy bone is starting to be created. We have a medullary cavity in the middle of the bone where the compact bone is starting to develop that has blood vessels in the middle of it. And then lastly, during early childhood growth, it's still possible as long as cartilage remains as the growth plate. So if you've ever heard of somebody saying, oh, I broke my growth plate, has anybody ever heard that before? Essentially, your growth plates are allowing your bones to continue to grow and move. Because if you think about it, you know, you've got an infant that's just born, it's probably like yay big, right? Then you start to have a toddler, and that toddler's like yay big. And then you've got like a young child, and you're like yay big. So as you can see, as we grow and move, our bones also are getting bigger. Does anybody know what body part does not grow? Yeah, it does grow. Think about like a infant. Their heads are like this big, right? What body part doesn't grow? I'm giving you a really good hint.
This is the one that doesn't
Your eyes. So your eye sockets and what was your guess? Or do you not want to share?
No, it's fine.
Okay. All right, that's funny. Your eye sockets grow, your eyelashes, your lids all grow, but your eyes actually from where they're at do not grow, which is interesting. Look it up. All right. So we've got some steps to some bone repair. So yeah, you just fell down the stairs. Sorry, lots of things are happening to you. You ran into the door, you fell down the stairs, and guess what? You broke your leg. I'm so sorry. The first thing that happens when your body recognizes injury to the bone is that there's a hematoma, which normally a hematoma is not good, but right now it's really good because we want a blood clot to form between the broken bone. Yes, because there are blood vessels in your bone, so we don't want them to burst, break, and, you know, go in places it's not supposed to. So there's a blood clot that forms called a hematoma. If you've ever donated plasma before and they messed up a little bit, they also call that a hematoma as well. Fibrocartilaginous callicizes after 3 weeks. So that means that the cartilage patch forms between the broken bones and it starts to calcify. It starts to make it a little bit harder support there. That takes about 3 weeks. And then a bony callus. Well, you guys know what a callus is. If you get calluses on your hands or the bottom of your feet, kind of like a harder skin. But this bony callus then makes a cartilage patch that's turned into bone after about 3 to 4 months. So that's why you'll see somebody who will probably go to the doctor and get an x-ray, and they get some sort of sling or boot, and then they've got to, you know, get a cast in a week, and then after a couple of weeks they get a new cast and things like that. It's just the longer process of that bone repair, but also different steps have to take place. It doesn't just happen overnight. Here's another picture of kind of what's going on here. So that first one is that picture of that hematoma. So that hematoma is kind of like a big blood clot. Because we have blood vessels in the middle of our bone, this is an important step, or else you'd start to see some like major bruising, some blood pooling because of the important blood vessels and things like that that are in our bones. So that hematoma kind of acts like a roadblock and helps us stop that. Then we start to have this fibrocartilaginous callus, like I talked about. It's indicated by this light blue color. It looks white up on the slide here for you guys, but in the picture from your book in 1214, it looks like this kind of light bluish white substance. It's kind of acting like a filler. It's supportive and structural, but it's also a little bit flexible, kind of the beginning of those steps of repairing the bone. Then we start to have a bony callus, which is kind of looks like the beginning of a spongy bone. And then after a while, it is a healed fracture. And that's where our body starts to remodel that. And sometimes we have some lasting effects. As you can see in that picture, you can see that there's still a slight bump on that bottom right picture in step 4. It's possible that wherever you broke your arm or your leg or your ankle, there may be a slight bump there from when it healed up. A lot of people see that, especially in ankles. If you've ever heard of osteoporosis, there's probably a commercial you've seen or somebody in your family has this. This is a condition where bones are weakened due to a decrease in bone mass. So what is bone mass? So the word mass is essentially like a weight or something that takes up space. So the mass of this remote or the mass of this pen, so the bone mass or how much it weighs and takes up space, if the bone mass is weakened or there's some degrading there, this is osteoporosis. The bone reabsorption exceeds production usually by age 40, which I guess that's kind of cool, which means that we aren't going to kind of grow our bones as well after the age of 40. So who's at risk? It says women, white or Asian, thin, family history, early menopause, smoking, diet low in calcium, excessive caffeine, alcohol consumption, or sedentary lifestyle. I don't know if we all fall into some sort of category there, but some of those things and why. So a diet low in calcium seems to be probably one of the most common, right? If you're not having enough calcium, the calcium and the mineral deposits in your bone, you're not producing blood well enough, so your body is probably working harder than it needs to, and then your bones are kind of taking that like snowball effect. Excessive caffeine or alcohol consumption, come on people. A sedentary lifestyle, so if your bones aren't used to the impact. So remember, if I told you you start to have a limp and that spongy bone kind of reassembles and helps with the absorption of your new gait, it also works in the other way. If you've been working out a lot and you've been going on long walks or been walking your dog 2 miles every day, or if you've gone on runs and things like that, your bone and that spongy bone will also do the same thing as if you're injured. It will start to kind of help absorb that impact. If you went from couch to a marathon, your body would not have had the impact development of that spongy bone yet, and you're most likely to have injuries. And that's also why injuries can happen too. It's kind of like like I said, that snowball effect. A family history of osteoporosis, early menopause, things like that. It can also lead to fractures and other complications because your bones are just a little bit weaker. You also see this in a little bit of the elder community. If they, if somebody in the elder community falls and they break their hip, it's not because, they fell harder than you would fall. It's just because of the degradation of the bones that are happening. If somebody has osteoporosis, you can see it kind of in the picture on letter B on the right. The bones are there, they just look a little bit weaker, more frail, more fragile, things like that. There's no treatment that can completely reverse the osteoporosis, but there's some ways that it can be prevented. Adequate calcium and vitamin D and exercise. Well, if you go outside and go for a walk or a run, those are 2 of those things right there. You can get some vitamin D from the sun, wearing sunscreen, of course, and then exercise. There are drugs that effectively maintain bone density by inhibiting the release of calcium from bones. So the bones create calcium that helps with muscle contractions and creating blood in our bone marrow. So these drugs kind of inhibit the amount of calcium that is released. So it kind of is like hanging on to it a little bit more. Biphosphonates are the most common medications prescribed for osteoporosis treatment, and there's some examples of those in those 4 bullet points right there. So some types of joints. So remember, joints are where the bones meet the bones. So that means like your elbow, your shoulder, your hip, your knee, your neck. All of these are different joints, all right? This is how bones are held together. They're held together by ligaments. Some of the most common ligaments are like your ACL, your MCL. The L in ACL stands for ligament. The fibrous joints are usually immovable, such as structures between the cranial bones. So remember I was telling you that there's different bones in our skull. There's actually space of fibrous joints between them, but you can't move the bones in your skull. Even though you think it's just like one big bone, it's really not. There's cartilaginous joints. These tend to be slightly movable, such as your invertebral discs. So my vertebrae moves pretty well, right? I'm getting kind of old. It moves okay, but it's not as movable as my synovial, my free-moving, movable joints, such as the ball and socket joint of your hip and your shoulder, the hinge of your knee and your elbow joints, so the hinge of my knee. There's also different types of synovial joints. Like I said, the ball and socket or hinge. So a ball and socket is like your shoulder. That's like when, if you ever have like a throwing motion or a pressing motion or a pulling motion, we're able to do all of those with our ball and socket joint. But think of like my knee. My knee can't move left to right. The only way my knee moves left to right is from my hip, which is a ball and socket joint. But my actual knee can only go like this. Okay? So here's, that's a picture of me. I'm just kidding. So the anatomy of the synovial joint. So right up here is a generalized synovial joint. It looks like it's in your knee. It's made of articular cartilage, and then you have your meniscus and your joint cavity filled with synovial fluid, and then some ligaments here. All right. This synovial joint in your knee is important for the hinging of your knee, like we talked about. And the important part of this slide is to know that there is some synovial fluid that helps with the movement of that kind of bone-on-bone contact. You also have a ball and socket joint, like the head of your humerus and your scapula, that kind of look like a fist and a hand, like this. It kind of fits together like a puzzle piece. But in between there, there's some synovial fluid. Then you also have like the hinge joint that's in your elbow. Okay, your elbow can only go up and down. All right, if I want to move my elbow somewhere else, it's my shoulder up here in the ball and socket joint that's doing that. All right, here's just another example of some of the different types of joints that are in your body. Okay, your hand is considered a saddle joint, which is pretty cool, or like your wrist. So you can move your hand back and forth, little side to side, but honestly, more than one way. And yes, I am waving at you guys. You're not waving back. Then you have like your plane joint, which is between your tarsal bones, which is really cool. Your ball and socket joints are like at your shoulders and your hip. You've got your hinge joints, which are like your elbows and your knee. Here's another cartoon picture just to show you of this ball and socket joint or the hinge joint. But in between here, you have synovial cavity, which has synovial fluid in it. You have this thing called a bursa, which is on the connection between the ligaments and the muscle. It's kind of like this fluid-like space. And then you have a tendon, and then you have the muscle. So that's kind of how all that's connected. If you've ever heard of somebody having tendinitis, it's usually near a joint, not always, but like a joint near your ankle or your shoulder, your elbow, things like that. It affects the tendon. We're not going to focus on that. Okay. Any questions about the skeletal system?
I do.
Yeah.
When you say what are bones made of, what do they consist of? Are you looking for, like, I want to say they're made of blood vessels, bone tissue, and cartilage. Are those two different? Is that a two different question, or is that a slash? Made of slash, what do they consist of?
It's more of a slash.
So
So they're made up of compact bone and spongy bone.
Okay.
It was that slide that looks like, They're made up of the bone matrix, bone
okay.
cells, compact bone, spongy bone.
And consist of blood vessels, bone tissue, and cartilage. Okay.
Yes. Anything else? All right, let's get into that muscular system. We're going through kind of that same thing here. Talking about the types, the functions, where we can find these muscles, what the muscles are made of. We have different types of muscle tissue. If you remember from a previous chapter, we have cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, which are all helpful in different ways. And then we're going to talk about some serious muscle diseases. All right, so like I said, those 3 different types of muscle tissue. You got smooth muscle. Does anybody know, I guess you could look at the front of the board too, but where we can find some smooth muscle tissue?
On your heart. Isn't that smooth?
That one's the second one.
Oh, right. Oh, I don't know that.
That's okay. Another chapter we talked about, so the word involuntary muscle. So these are all the muscles that are moving around in your body that you're not thinking about.
Would you find them on your lungs?
Yep, your lungs. Your esophagus was one I was thinking of. The smooth muscle in your esophagus kind of contracts and relaxes like this, and it pushes that food or that beverage or whatever you're having down your esophagus.
Stomach.
Your stomach, yep. Stomach, small intestines are made up of smooth muscle, thank goodness, right? Or else I'd have to actually think about digesting my food. It's hard enough to cook it. Yeah.
Would you like your eyelids?
Your eyelids, yeah, kind of. I mean, you do have to, now we're all thinking about blinking, aren't we? Yes, there is some smooth muscle there. It also is mixed with skeletal muscle because I can tell my eyes to blink, but you're not consciously thinking about it too. So there's a little bit of mixture of both. Whereas skeletal muscle, number 3 here is voluntary muscle, which is all the ones that are attached to a skeleton, which we're going to talk about. Can anybody think of a skeletal muscle example? You go to the gym. Tell me a muscle you could work at the gym.
Your quads?
Your quads, your quadriceps are a skeletal muscle. It's connected to your femur. And if I want to hinge my knee like this, I have to contract my quad and relax my hamstring muscle. And if I want to bring it back down, I'm going to relax my quadricep and contract my hamstring. Don't worry, I don't think all that through that process every single time I want to go like this. Anybody else? What's another muscle you could work at the gym? All right, what's that?
Core.
Your core, so abdomen. There's a lot of different parts of your abdomen. We'll talk about those here in a little bit, but yeah, my skeletal muscles of my abdomen, they allow for movement of side to side, front to back. Core is really important for a lot of sports like baseball, golf, football, soccer, insert lots of sports here. And then we have your cardiac. This is involuntary muscle, thank goodness, right? We don't need to think about every time our heart beats. Very thankful. Found in the heart. So it's the contractions of your heart that are pumping the blood through, getting it to the lungs, back through the heart, and to the other extremities. Yeah.
Is it only found in the heart?
Yes. So other involuntary muscle would be considered smooth muscle. So cardiac is only found like in the heart itself.
What distinguishes it from smooth other than it's found in the heart?
Yep, it has intercalculated discs. It has some striations to it a little bit. So it has the structure of a skeletal, but it has these calcified intercalculated discs between it. I think if I were to look at 3 different pictures of, I don't know if we have pictures. We do. Cool. Going on to the next slide. That's a great transition. So these are those discs that I was talking about. Your intercalculated discs. There's also some, it kind of looks to me, so like this is skeletal muscle. It's very distinguishable. It has like stripes in it, these striations, striated cells. Smooth muscle kind of looks like it's like squished. You see the nucleus here? Cardiac muscle kind of looks a little bit like both. So you've got these like discs, this stripe-like structure, but then you also have the involuntary movement of smooth muscle, and the nuclei here are kind of flat and long, or these are a little bit more round. So that's kind of how you distinguish them if you were to look at 3 pictures of them. Skeletal muscle, pretty easy to distinguish. Smooth muscle, bigger nuclei, flat kind of look to it. Cardiac, I think of it as like a combo a little bit, but they have those intercalculated discs. So like it shows here, these occur, the skeletal muscles occur in muscles attached to the skeleton. Smooth muscle, it has the spindle-shaped cells with single nuclei. It has no striations. These are involuntary substances of the body found in blood vessel walls, walls of the digestive tract, and then cardiac is, it occurs in the wall of the heart. It has the branching striated cells, kind of like the first one, but each has a single nucleus, and it occurs in the walls of the heart, functions in pumping the blood. It is involuntary. So the words voluntary and involuntary, like if you volunteer to go work at the food bank, it's your choice, you're doing that. Involuntary means something that you're not really thinking about, but it's still going on. Some functions of the skeletal muscles. They support the body by allowing us to stay upright. So while our bones give us structure, the upright stance is a muscular thing. It allows for movement by attaching to the skeleton. So our muscles tissue, it can be, if you palpate a muscle like your arm, it's kind of squishy, right? Even though you may lift some weights, right? But your bone is for sure a hard structural substance. So the movement of the skeleton is kind of what muscle tissue is really important for. It can also help maintain a constant body temperature. Thinking about like when you're really cold, you may tense up a little bit and start to shake. That's your muscles contracting to help kind of warm you up. It also assists in blood and lymphatic vessels, and it protects your internal organs and stabilizes your joints. So if you're having some joint problems in your shoulder, the doctor or the physical therapist may have you do a lot of like kind of shoulder strengthening exercises, because your muscles are what help support and stabilize some of those joints. All right. Hard to see picture, I understand that, but you could take some notes or put some in your bingo card of some of these muscles. The triceps brachii are up here at the top. Triceps and biceps, right? We're going to the gym, we're going to work on some triceps and biceps. Triceps are posterior, kind of on the back side of your anatomical arm. Your biceps are here on the top. What's really cool is your biceps are made up of 2 muscles groups, and your triceps are made up of 3. That's why they're called bi and tri. There's another picture right next to it, that biceps brachii. So your triceps straightens the forearm and elbow. So if I wanted to do the motion like this, I'm going to go do some bicep curls. My bicep is contracting, my triceps are relaxing. All right, but if I want to straighten out my arm again after this motion, that is your triceps. Then you have, let's see here, your pectoralis major, which is right up here in the chest region. It's like when you ever go do a chest press or an incline bench or things like that, that's your pecs. You have your, I want to see what else ones. We have your external and internal obliques. So if you've ever gone to the gym to work on your obliques, that's like the sides of your abdomen here. Okay, so external obliques, your internal obliques are kind of on the inside here. Those are those motions if you ever do like a side bend or like penguins or things like that. Those are going to help with your oblique muscles. Just trying to see which ones we should know. So you have your quadriceps, which are the front of your leg. They attach to your femur. Quad meaning 4. There are 4 muscles of your quadriceps. And it also helps that they're called quadriceps femoris, excuse me, which helps because we know it attaches to our femur, femoris and femur. You have your trapeze and your deltoid. Your deltoid is kind of that calf of your shoulder. Your trapeze muscles are, if we were all to go swing from the trapeze, that's what muscle we would be using. I think that's kind of funny. Your latissimus dorsi, or if you say, oh, my lats are so sore, that's down here, right? Or a lat pull down in the gym. Gluteus maximus is like your butt area. Your biceps femoris are parts of your hamstring muscle, draws the thigh backward and bends the knee. And then you have your gastrocnemius muscle, which are essentially what people call your calf muscle on the bottom of your leg on the posterior side or the dorsal side. So let's break it down by upper and lower extremities here. Your upper extremity is like your arms. So you have your pectoralis major, which is in that chest area. You have your deltoid, the caps of your shoulders, and your biceps brachii. So your brachial region is like your arm. So when it says biceps brachii or biceps femoris, those are two different. So you can't just write biceps because you have a bicep technically in your hamstring, bicep femoris. Bicep brachii is the one up here that if you go to the gym and you do some bicep curls, that's what they're talking about there. Your posterior are also your deltoid, your trapezius muscle, and then also your triceps brachii on the bottom. Your lower extremities, your adductor is a part of your hip, and it helps with this motion when you can move your hip across your body. That's adductor muscle, your sartorius muscle, and your quadriceps femoris. These are all on the posterior side. Your anterior side. Your quadriceps femoris, the four muscles that are made up of your quadriceps femoris are listed there. You have your rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius, and vastus medialis. Posterior, you had also your adductor. You have your biceps femoris, which I talked about, which is also considered your hamstrings, and your gastrocnemius, which is like your calf muscles. So we've got the core that Tyler was talking about. So in our core, you have your anterior, so you have your rectus abdominis and your external oblique, which are kind of shown here on the anterior side. So when I refer to anterior and posterior, anterior is the same side that your eyes are on. Posterior is like your vertebrae in your spine or the back side. So anterior, you have your rectus abdominis and your external obliques. Posterior, we have our traps, our trapezius, you have your latissimus dorsi, and you also have your gluteus maximus, which is part of your core. So how do muscles interact together? So this is a little bit of some physiology. If you've ever wondered what the word physiology means, is the movement. So some muscles work together and others work as opposing or opposite pairs. So we talked about like that movement of like a bicep curl. So if I want to do a bicep curl in the gym, what I'm doing here, moving this remote up, the bicep contracts, and at the same time it pulls my forelimb up. So I'm contracting or making this muscle smaller, and by doing that it moves my arm up. And what also is then happening when I go down is that tricep contracts. So now I'm going to contract and make my tricep a little bit smaller, which then pulls that forelimb down, and at the same time that bicep relaxes. Okay, so when skeletal muscles contract, they transmit force to the bones and move them. This is a picture of a frog, just to show you how muscles are attached to each of the upper hind legs and contracts and pulls it slightly forward to relative to maintain the body axis. So when that frog kind of pushes away, those muscles are contracting and relaxing in a certain pattern. The muscle or the skeletal muscular systems, they're made up of muscle fibers and tendons. The muscle fibers, the skeletal muscles are bundles of muscle fibers that interact with bones. So that's why they're called the skeletal muscular system. It works with the skeleton. And they're bundled inside a dense connective tissue sheath, or like kind of a space. The tendons are then extensions of the connective tissue sheath that attach to the skeletal muscles and bones. So the muscle itself is not attached to the bone, it's the tendon that's attached to the muscle that's attached to the bone. which is kind of interesting to think about. And we've seen a picture a couple of slides ago. Let me see where that was. All right, over here you can see that the muscle is then attached to the tendon, and the tendon is using the bursa, which is attached to the bone. All right, how are the skeletal muscle systems organized? They're composed of many bundled fibers, okay? These muscle fibers are made up of many myofibrils, which are composed of filaments. So all these words, essentially what they should mean to you are these skeletal muscles have those stripes in them, and those stripes are fibers. And each repeating unit of the myofibril is called a sarcomere, which kind of you can see here. So if we're looking at that strong bicep muscle, what that muscle is made up of are these bundled fibers, which kind of look like French fries and like a sushi wrap. I don't know if food is a good example or not, but each of these single fibers are then made up of nuclei and cells, and then the bands inside of there are called the sarcomeres. You could also think of these as like the pull and peel Twizzlers. So you have like a package of pull and peel Twizzlers, and then you have the individual pull and peel Twizzler, and then the little part that pulls off. None of you just bite into that, do you? You all pull and peel the Twizzler. We can all be friends. Does anybody eat string cheese just by biting it? Oh, you do? You've done it.
I've done both.
I mean, if I'm really hungry and I don't have time, yes, I'm gonna bite into the cheese stick, but I mean, it just tastes different when you pull it apart. Thank you. Okay. Sorry if you like to eat your string cheese like that. We can all still be friends. Okay. So that's kind of what that muscle fiber looks like, is like a string cheese or a pull and peel Twizzler. There's different parts to it. These myofibrils are made of two myofilaments. So it's a thin filament consisting of two intertwining strands of protein called actin. The thick filament is composed of several hundred molecules of protein called myosin. So we have actin and myosin, which are two important words here, that are kind of shaped like a golf club, and they slide over each other during a muscle contraction. They kind of look like an inchworm. They kind of look like those little golf clubs right here. So this is one molecule of actin, and they work with this myosin in an arrangement to work on contracting the muscle. All right, so we have motor units and muscle tension. So a motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it controls are called one motor unit. So for example, there are motor neurons which help with movement. So for example, when you touch a hot surface and your body senses that it's super hot, the motor neurons tell your body to contract the muscles in a certain pattern that pulls your hand away. And those are considered motor units in muscle tension. The muscle fibers and the muscle are organized into these motor units that contract in response to signals from another motor neuron. So the signal, it said, this is a hot surface. It told the brain said contract. And so it pulled your hand back, it told your shoulder to lift up. It's kind of like this long communication telephone game, but much more accurate than the actual game of telephone. What actually is happening here is those action potentials. So it's an electrical signal in the muscle fibers that causes the release of calcium. There we go, that calcium that's super important for our bones and muscles, right? Drink your milk. These calcium floods out and allows for actin and myosin of the heads to interact together, and it causes this muscle contraction. So these kind of actin and myosin work together to kind of move down and contract the muscle. The sliding filament model, so this is when the actin filaments slide past the myosin filaments and shorten the sarcomere, and then you have the muscle contraction itself. That is the shortening of the sarcomeres and of myofibrils and all the muscle fibers. So when you're thinking of what is a muscle actually contracting, what does that mean? It's actually kind of like twisting together and moving across and kind of contracting and getting smaller. Here's another example of that. So you can kind of think of it as like these orange parts over here are my fingers. And when these actin and myosin work together to contract, they kind of go like this, and then they contract, and then they relax and contract. These are the relative positions of the actin and the myosin filaments inside a sarcomere between contractions, and then the relative positions of the actin and myosin filaments in the same sarcomere contract. So we're going kind of like this. So what are some common muscle disorders? All right, if you've ever been on a sports team or if you've ever just exercised in general, you've maybe heard of the word sprain or strain. And those words are sometimes thrown out interchangeably, but they actually mean different things. So a sprain, if you like sprain your ankle, this is stretching or tearing of a ligament. So S-P-R-A-I-N, a sprain is a tearing of a ligament. So if you sprain your ankle, you're going to be like stretching or tearing a ligament in your ankle. A strain, S-T-R-A-I-N, one letter different there, is a stretching or tearing of a muscle. So if you have a muscle strain or a sprain, those are two different things. So you could strain your quadricep. You cannot sprain your quadricep because that's a muscle. You can strain your bicep, but you cannot sprain your bicep. You could sprain a ligament in your knee or your ankle. You probably also have a spasm. Some people call these cramps. That's like, man, when I played college soccer once, I was so hungry. My dad took me out for Mexican afterwards, and I was so thirsty, I ordered a Pepsi, which I'm not much of a pop person. But I had just played like 90 minutes of soccer, and then I like chugged 2 Pepsis, and my leg muscle just was cramping. It was because I was really dehydrated, and I decided to drink this drink that has a lot of sugar and sodium in it, and it essentially caused this cramp. So I'm sitting in the Mexican restaurant like this, and my legs cramping. It was really embarrassing. But so a spasm, a sudden involuntary muscle contraction. You've probably felt it before. If you actually like bend your leg back too hard, sometimes it cramps up a little bit. It feels like somebody's grabbing your muscle and you can't do anything about it. You've maybe felt it in the bottom of your feet or your calf. That's a spasm or a cramp. Or cramp, right there, the next one. Strong painful spasm often occurring at night or after exercise, which was both. Straining and overusing that muscle can cause a cramp or a spasm. Dehydration, depletion of minerals, or not enough blood getting to your muscles. So like if, you know, it doesn't have enough oxygen, enough blood going to that area, it's really going to squeeze that muscle and try and, well, one, I feel like it's your body letting you know, hey, there's something wrong. But what's actually happening is that it's kind of an imbalance of the chemicals. Some muscular diseases. So the last slide were considered disorders. This slide is considered diseases. So myalgia is the achy muscles due to an injury or an infection. You can also have fibromyalgia, which you've maybe heard of that as a chronic achy of the muscles. This is not well understood. You have muscular dystrophy. This is a genetic disorder, so that means it can be inherited. It's not something that's like onset because of choices. This is like a genetic disorder, and it's which muscles progressively degenerate and weaken. And when you have progressive degeneration of the muscles, it can affect your skeletal system, movement, breathing, things like that. It's really quite serious. ALS, you've probably heard of, either in the news, somebody you know, or even in a movie. This is commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. This is where the motor neurons degenerate. So those are those electrical signals that are telling us what to do in our muscles. Those start to degenerate. So, and it can lead to death because of the loss of the voluntary muscle movement. So there's a lot of essentially action potentials in motor neurons that are firing through my body right now. That's allowing me to stand up. It's allowing me to move my hands and my mouth to speak and my eyes to blink and to take a deep breath. All of those action potentials, but if those motor neurons are starting to degenerate or move slower, it's kind of just like this slow, kind of tragic disease. It can be really heartbreaking. And then sarcomas, this is cancer that can originate in the muscle or connective tissue associated with muscle. Okay, so that's the last of this slide. Does anybody have any questions about the muscular system? Yes.
When you were talking about the strains, I know that's a question on the review.
Yeah.
So is it sprain or strain? Well, I'm asking about the one guy breaks his leg or the one person and is it a sprain take longer to heal than a broken bone?
Okay, so the answer is a sprain. It takes longer to heal than a strain, which is hard to say. So let me write that down to make sure you heard me correctly. So a sprain, it takes longer. Okay, and here's why. Because a ligament is harder to heal than a muscle. Okay, so you can strain, or essentially if somebody says, I pulled my quad, I overworked myself and pulled my quad, and it feels like there's a little bump in my quad. Okay, that would be a strain. And this is muscle. Okay, so a sprain is going to take longer because a ligament is harder to repair than a muscle. Okay, think of like an ACL, a rolled ankle. If that happens, you're out for weeks and months. If you pull a quad, you're out for like 2 weeks. So that's kind of the difference here. So this is a ligament. I think of an example because I had really bad ankles in college as well too. So like I would, sprain my ankle all the time and just have to get it really taped. But I should have sat out longer, but I didn't. Things like that. Does that answer your question?
Well, it's saying that, so.
Oh, this is the one where it's asking somebody breaks a bone and somebody.
So the bone would heal faster than 3 or 4 months?
Sorry, I thought you were asking the difference between a sprain and a strain.
Well, no, I'm glad, I mean, that's better clarification, but yeah, I guess I was asking about the bone, yeah, the question about the 2 athletes.
So it said somebody.
One has a sprain and one has a severe sprain and one broke his fibula.
Okay,
His
so
or her, I'm sorry,
yes.
what it says.
So
Yeah.
the broken bone would be longer than that.
Okay.
So this is like months out. This is like 3 to 6 months. Because we have to repair the bone cells, like we talked about. This one is like 2 to 8 weeks. And this one is like max 2 weeks usually. If you're out for an injury like that. Depends on the repair. So what are we repairing? We're repairing a bone, repairing a ligament, repairing a muscle.
Okay.
It just depends. Like, obviously there's some sprains that could be worse than like if everybody's ever heard of turf toe. Technically in turf toe, you actually are kind of breaking some of the small bones in your toe, which technically you can tape and play through, which would be different than an ankle. So it's like there's some subjectivity to it, but in the example of the question, the bone would take longer to heal. Other questions? All right. You guys, if you haven't yet filled out your bingo card, now is the time.
Quick question.
Yes.
Do we have to specify which bicep it is?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. If you haven't had a chance to fill out your bingo card, yes, you get 1 free space. As I'm passing these out, you can fill it out with muscles and bones, maybe the ones that stuck out to you, maybe the ones that you think I'm going to put on the bingo here. These have not been used, but if you'd like to get a wipe and wipe down your chips, you're more than welcome. Here we go. Filling out that bingo card.
Oh, we put these in here?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
and then
okay.
I'm going to put a picture up on the board. And you have to, if you have it, you can put a chip on your space. If you don't have it, you can put a chip on there. And then if you get a bingo, I'm going to have you go through and say what you have. And we'll see who can get the bingo first. Because you got about what, like 10 minutes left? We have time for 1 or 2 games, depending on how good you guys are. At bingo. Welcome. Did I miss anybody? Bones and muscles, bingo. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so, maybe to write down a few more. Unless you guys need like a minute. Do you guys need a whole minute? Maybe? See some people still writing, so I'll just talk to fill up the space. There will be some pretty hard ones, and then there'll be some fairly easy ones. There will be some that have a slide that have 5 blanks on them, and maybe you have to fill out all of the blanks, or maybe there'll be 2 slides that are the same, and on one slide I'll block out 3, and the other one I'll block out 2, so you did get kind of a hint on the slide before, and things like that. If you don't know it, it's okay. You just get less of a chance of getting bingo. No big deal. Does anybody need more time? Okay. Here we go. Bones and muscles bingo. I blocked off something at the top. Oh yeah, this is a hard one. Starting us off strong. Do you have it? You can mark it. It's a specific bone in the skull. We may see this picture again, so maybe look at that kind of close. All right, we're moving on. So there's 2 muscles right there blocked off. There's also a hint on the top left if you brought your glasses today. You can kind of see that from far away. They are labeled at the top. All right, moving on. Whoa, too fast. Here's another one. I blocked it out. So if you've got a picture memory, also maybe if you forgot what the one on the top was from a couple of slides ago, you now have it on your picture up here. All right. Take a good guess. We are moving on. Ooh, this one has a lot of options on this slide. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options that you could possibly have. This one over here is pointing to a muscle that is highlighted in red. This one is a bone up here. This one is the joint. These 2 are bones. This should be a big slide for you guys. This is a part of a bone, and so is this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options. I'll give you a couple seconds to check it out. Wow, you getting close on your bingo over there?
No,
Not really. Just take one away. All right. I'm about to hit the next slide. Ooh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different parts of this thingy that's up there that I'm not going to say out loud. Any of those regions are considered fair. Moving on. This muscle highlighted in red. Somebody's got to get close. Next one. Ooh. 3 parts. Not that great of a picture on the slide, but you can give the blue part, the yellow part, or this is green right here. So you can have blue, yellow, or green, or all 3.
Can you take ribs?
Uh-huh.
Bingo.
Bingo. All right, what did you have?
So I have ribs,
Uh-huh.
coccyx,
Uh-huh.
free space, carpals, and radius.
Nice. Anybody else get a bingo? Yeah, Hannah got a bingo? Okay.
Quadriceps, ribs, biceps, and
Uh-huh. Nice. Anybody else? All right. If you have to go, that's fine. If you want to play one more round, I've got lots of slides. Overplayed. We can play again. Or you can leave me. That's okay too. Even though I got all these slides. I didn't know how good you guys would be at this. But you were fantastic. So yeah, you can leave your chips on your table, but all those handouts are for you, and I'll just come around and pick those up. Please wipe your tables down when you leave, unless you're staying with me to play bingo. If you are that kind of person. I'll see you guys on Monday.